Hi Pathfinders, it's me again. It's Aunt Sandra. Today I'm back with yet another honor. And today we're going to be talking about the reptile honor. I can imagine you were creeping and crawling when I was talking about reptiles, right? So this honor is talking about some of the creatures that God has created in this world. The word reptile comes from a Latin word, and the literal meaning simply means creeping animals. So most reptiles are creeping animals, and we're going to have a closer look at what they're all about. Now, I have with me a list of requirements that we're going to cover in this honor, and I'm going to read them out for you. And the first one says, what characteristics must an animal have to be classified as a reptile? And then the second requirement, it asks us to name 15 reptiles that we can find in our locality. So for the ease of this honor, we'll simply talk about 15 reptiles that we can find in the country in Zimbabwe. And then we'll go on to the third one. It says here, can you name 5 poisonous reptiles in your area? And you need to describe each one as to where it stays, where it can be found, and then the location of its fangs. For the purposes of this presentation, we'll just look at one particular reptile, and then we can research on the remaining others. And then the fourth requirement asks us to tell what one would do if they're bitten by a venomous snake. The fifth requirement, it asks us to tell what would you do if you are bitten by a non-venomous snake. We'll go into more detail a bit later on. Requirements 6 and 7 are also very practical, and these are things that you will have to do in responding to the requirements of this honor. So you can do any one of the following. You can tell the life history of one representative of each of the following groups. You find a lizard, you find a snake, you also find a turtle. And then you will make a comparison of these groups of animals, and you are comparing in terms of their life history, in how they have their young. You also compare in their structure, their physical structures, their eyes, their ears, their teeth maybe, horns if they have them, their heart, their lungs, their limbs, their tails, and also their shells or their scales. You'll find that reptiles generally have shells or scales, but you will be making a comparison of these. And then if we move forward, the part B, you can look after a reptile. And reptiles are kept in a little place called a terrarium. A terrarium is the home of the reptile. And you will look after it and make a note of how you take care of it over a period of 3 months. Now, I'm not sure about you, but I'm definitely doing the first one. I don't think I can look after a reptile. I'm too scared. But anyway, we'll move on. And then the last but definitely not least requirement, you're going to tell us 2 Bible stories in which reptiles played a major part. That should be fairly simple, isn't it? I can think of 2 stories already, but we'll take care of that much later on. Now, to get the ball rolling, we'll start with the characteristics of a reptile. How can one tell that this is a reptile? The first thing is reptiles are cold-blooded. And they are called cold-blooded because they are not able to regulate the temperature of their bodies on their own. Hence, the term cold-blooded. And like I mentioned earlier, most reptiles have a thick skin, and they usually have a shell or they have scales. Now, try and think of a snake. If you are brave enough to walk close enough to a snake, you will see that the scales are packed in very neatly all over its body. It's a kind of protection all over its body. And the typical one, being the tortoise, is the one with the hard shell. And when the tortoise is shy or afraid of a predator, it hides and goes back into its shell. And then if we move on, yet another characteristic of the reptile is that most of them lay eggs. Now, there are 2 terms that I'd like you to learn. They are very special terms. They are very big terms. And trust me, when you say them, you're going to sound very educated. I hope I'll be able to pull it off. Let me give it a try. Now, the first term for reptiles that lay eggs outside their body is what is called viviparous. Viviparous. So some reptiles are viviparous. That means they hide their eggs in the earth, and then the children will hatch from those eggs all by their own. And then the other type of reptile is what we call the ovoviviparous reptile. Now, this is very interesting. I found it a bit sickening, but very interesting. Because what happens is the reptile has its eggs within its body. You know, it carries eggs just like a human being would carry a baby. But then this is what then happens. The eggs will hatch inside the reptile. And then the live young will come out as though it is giving birth like mammals do. Now, isn't that weird? I thought that was really weird. But also, it's quite amazing because it's God's creation and that's just how He's made it. Now, the difference with these two kinds of reptiles is this. The viviparous ones are able to lay their eggs outside like the turtles because they can keep the eggs warm. They cover them up in the warm sand and the eggs are warm. The eggs need the warmth and the moisture to be able to hatch. And then the ones that are ovoviviparous, the ones that have their eggs within their bodies, it's because they need to keep them as warm as possible. Eggs will not be able to incubate and hatch if it's too cold, and this is why they are hatched within the body. Very interesting. That's just how science is. Now, what about some fun facts? Let's listen and learn from these fun facts about reptiles. The first one, lizards and snakes, they smell, guess with what? With their tongues. That's quite weird. And then you'll find that the smallest reptile that is known in the world is what is called a mini chameleon. This one comes from Madagascar and measures a mere 2.5 centimeters. Now try and measure 2.5 centimeters off your ruler. That's really tiny. And then the biggest reptile known to man is the saltwater crocodile. We've got crocodiles here in Zimbabwe. Now listen to this. A crocodile can grow up to 907 kgs in weight and up to 3.8 meters in length. That is amazing. That's like taking the tallest man you know and probably laying them down on the ground 3-4 times. That's pretty tall, if you ask me. And then the last thing, well, another fun fact would be that reptiles are born on land. And because they are born on land, they are born with very strong survival instincts. You will never find a mother snake nursing her baby snakes. They are out on their own because they are born with that ability to handle life pretty much on their own. Moving on with our fun facts. They say that in the world there are at least 250 species of turtles. There are 25 species of crocodiles, the different types of crocodiles all over the world, like the alligators. You have 3,500 species of snakes. That's a whole lot of slithering all over the place. And 3,000 species of lizards. I don't know about you guys. I'm not feeling comfortable right now. I really don't like creepy crawlies. But we still need to learn about them anyway because God made them. And then most reptiles, they are carnivorous. What that simply means is that they eat flesh, and most of them survive on insects, other smaller snakes, and even small animals. They can eat rock rabbits, and at times, the bigger snakes like the python, they can eat deer and antelope. And then, this is interesting. A reptile will eat at least 30 to 50 times less food than birds and mammals do. So what it really means is reptiles don't eat much, and yet they are able to survive. Okay, moving on. I'm sure many of us have seen this horrific film about a snake called the anaconda. There's this snake called the green anaconda, and it is the heaviest known snake in the world. Whilst what something is called a reticulated python is the longest snake in the world. Now, I hope you'll be able to see this action. There are worms that walk this way, and that's exactly what the python does. Huge as it is. It scoots on its tummy and goes in a straight motion. Oh, I don't like snakes. But anyway, we will still continue. The fastest reptile that is known is called an iguana. An iguana is a type of lizard, and it is known to travel up to 32 kilometers per hour. Can you imagine that speed? 32 kilometers of hour. That's a lizard that's scooting from one spot to the other. And then the snakes. The fastest known snake in the world is the rattlesnake. Rattlesnakes are native to America, and this particular rattlesnake is known to move up to a speed of 29 kilometers an hour. We've got our own snake here in Zimbabwe that is pretty fast too. They say that the black mamba moves at 20 kilometers an hour. That is pretty fast if you ask me. And this is the reason why you can never outrun a snake. I'm sure you've heard really scary stories of mambas that have attacked people, and that's because it's swift. And the poison in a mamba's body, by the way, is enough to strike 12 grown men dead in a matter of seconds. You must respect this guy. Don't mess with the mamba. Now let's move on. Yet another requirement, I want to believe this is requirement number 3. Actually, it's number 2. Our second requirement, it asks us to name 15 reptiles that you can find in your locality. So like I said when I read out the requirements, we're going to look at 15 reptiles that you can find in Zimbabwe. I'm sure this will be very, very easy for us. We can look around our homes. We can also think of reptiles that we've seen when we visit the rural areas. We can think of the reptiles that we see when we visit animal sanctuaries like Mukuvisi Woodlands. You can also think of the reptiles that you see when you visit the snake world. There's lots of them there. But just to give you a hint there, we've got lizards such as the salamander and the rock monitor lizard. I encountered that particular one, the rock monitor lizard, when I went to the rural areas. I was horrified. I found it milking a cow. I promise I was so scared. I had no idea what to do. With its back legs, it was tying the cow's legs, and with its front legs, it was holding the cow's legs, and then it was drinking directly from the cow. The poor animal was so scared, but fortunately, after it had its fill, it just sauntered off into the bush. So that's the rock monitor lizard. We also have turtles. We've got lots of these as well in our country. We have the leopard tortoise, called that, the leopard tortoise, because it's got spots on its back, just like a leopard does. We also have what is called the hinged back tortoise. We also have the Rhodesian mud turtle, which loves to play around in the mud, and that's where its habitat or its home is. We have the crocodiles, the Nile crocodiles, the big 907 kg crocodiles that I spoke of. And then we have lots and lots and lots of, guess what? Snakes, you guessed it. So we have the black mamba and we have the green mamba. We also have the blind worm. This is the one that we normally see in our households. They say it's harmless, but I'm not taking chances. We also have the puff adder. In Shona, we call it chiva. It's the very short, thick snake that pretends to be lazy until you get close to it. It strikes very fast, it gives a very painful bite, and you swell very quickly when it envenomates you. We also have the python, and this is an endangered and protected species. I believe we've done an honor on endangered species before, and I want to believe we spoke about the python then. If you happen to see a python, be sure to tell the local authorities, and it will be taken away. You're not allowed to kill a python. And then we also have the type of snakes which I call migrant snakes. We've got the Mozambican-speaking cobra from our neighbor Mozambique, and we also have the Egyptian cobra. We also have chameleons, lots and different types of chameleons. It always scares me a little when it changes color and takes on the color of the dress I'm wearing. I hope there are no chameleons right here. I don't want to see a khaki chameleon. But anyway, we move on. So I've already spoken about lots and lots of reptiles, and I'm sure from these you'd be able to identify 15 reptiles that you can find in an area close to you. As I was talking about the black mambas and the green mambas, I just remembered something. Did you know The black mamba is called a black mamba not because its body is black, but the mouth is black. Now imagine being able to identify a snake when it opens its mouth. Hopefully it won't be too late. So it's pretty much the same with the green mamba. It is only called a green mamba because the color of its mouth is more or less green, but the bodies are usually black to gray. Okay, now we'll move on to our next requirement. The next requirement says, can you name poisonous reptiles in your area and then describe each as to the location of fangs and geographical distribution. Now I'm going to talk about one type of snake, and that will be the black mamba. I'm fairly familiar with it because the black mamba lives in rocky areas, and the area in which I work is very rocky and very dry, and we have lots of mambas that we see on site. So the black mamba, normally it has fangs towards the back of its head. And why it has fangs there, it's so that it can bite into their prey and hold on to it long enough to be able to inject venom. So you will find black mambas normally in woodlands. You will find them in very rocky areas, rocky sandy areas. They normally love to stay in the mountains. That is the nature of the habitat where they normally want to stay. Okay. So you can name 4 more poisonous snakes. Like I said earlier, we've got the spitting cobras. The cobras are more or less venomous, all of them. You can also talk about the gaboon viper. The vipers also are venomous. You can talk about the adders, such as the puff adder. You can talk about the berg adder as well. The mambas, we've already spoken about those. Okay, now if we move on, we can also talk about what can you do or what do you do when you're bitten by a poisonous snake? Now, I prefer to err on the side of caution because you can talk about what to do when you're bitten by a poisonous snake and also what to do when you're bitten by a non-venomous snake. Unless you are very sure about the type of snake that you're dealing with, I personally would prefer to treat any snake as a venomous snake, unless proven otherwise. So I'll answer point A and point B of this requirement this way. When you are bitten by a venomous snake, first and foremost, protect the patient and others, including yourself, from further attack. There is no glory in being a dead hero. I will repeat that again. There is no glory in being a dead hero. You don't want to rush in where angels fear to tread, and then you are also bitten by their snake. And then now there are 2 casualties. So make sure that you are able to protect the patient from the snake and also protect yourself before you go in to try and assist the patient. Snakes normally go away once they've attacked. They normally don't stay in the vicinity unless it has been cornered. But once the snake has moved off, then you can access the victim. Make sure that you keep the patient calm. There is nothing that frightens a patient more, as in the fact that they've been bitten and everybody else is panicking. Oh my God, they're going to die. Oh my God, I'm going to have a heart attack. It's terrible. So if you find that you're going to panic close to someone that's been bitten by a snake, please just be charitable and move away. But it's very important to keep the patient calm. Why? When their heart beats and they are hyperventilating, we are simply assisting the venom to move faster around the body. Now, the venom is injected in what is called the lymphatic system rather than directly into the blood system, contrary to what we believe. But this doesn't mean that we don't need to move with speed. We really need to move quickly when a person has been bitten by a snake. But my point, bottom line, keep the patient calm and you stay calm as well. Okay, now when it comes to a bitten limb, because of the nature of snakes, they usually will attack the leg or the arm. Now we need to make sure that when we are taking the patient to the clinic, we transport them in such a way that we leave the limb in a functional position. So for example, if it's the arm, we need to make sure if we're going to splint it, we splint it in such a way that they can use it later on after they've been assisted. And then you will find that a lot of people, because they don't know what to do when they encounter someone who's been bitten by a snake, a person can become thirsty. If I give a typical example, when you are bitten by a black mamba, the black mamba attacks what is known as the central nervous system. This is where the brain comes in. And when the patient is getting envenomated, their brain starts literally going crazy. They don't think right, and they may think that they are thirsty. You must never give a patient that's been bitten by a snake anything to drink or anything to eat. In the event that they continue asking for water, the best thing you can do is to just moisten their lips with a little bit of water. Just take some water from your fingertips and just put a little bit of water on their lips so that their lips stay moist. And then depending again on what area of the body has been bitten, you need to remove any items of clothing which may be difficult to take off when they've been bitten. So if they've been bitten on the arm, for example, and they are wearing a ring, do try and take the ring off before the body swells and you are not able to then cut the ring off. The next point is keep the patient as still as possible. Don't move them around, and also don't make the patient walk. Where possible, carry them and transport them quickly with speed. Also advise where you're going that we've got a patient that's been bitten by a snake. Where possible, take a picture, even a picture from a distance. A poor picture is much better than no picture at all, because you need to be able to tell what kind of a snake has bitten this individual. So you'll find, okay, let's go a little bit scientific here. When you are bitten by a snake, there are 3 types of toxin or venom that can be injected in your body. So there's the hemotoxic venom. The hemotoxic venom affects the blood. Wherever you see the prefix hemo, you're talking about blood. So hemotoxic venom affects the blood. And you'll find that when you are bitten by a hemotoxic snake, you will bleed from every aperture in your body. So you'll be bleeding from your eyes, from your nose, from your mouth, from your ears, and you will eventually be bled out, and that's how you die. And then the second type is the cytotoxic poison. Cyto simply deals with the muscle, and so it will make you swell like the puff adder. And then the last one that I spoke about already is the neurotoxic poison, which affects your brain function. And that one is particularly deadly because within an hour or 2 hours, if you don't get help, you're gone. So we must be very careful when we encounter snakes, not to make them panic and attack us, because the effects of those bites can be very, very fatal. Okay, now let's move on. The other requirement is asking us to say, what would you do if you're bitten by a non-venomous snake? So like I said earlier, as long as the snake that bites you is non-venomous, treat it as a venomous snake. They will say, though, that if you're bitten by a non-venomous snake, you simply clean the wound and then you put a bandage over the wound, and still you need to get the patient to a treatment center. Now, moving on. Okay, we're moving on to the next requirement, and this one says do one of the following. So you either tell the history of one representative of each of the following, the lizard, the snake, or the turtle, and then you compare the 3 groups as to what they look like. Or you can look after a reptile. I think I'd be interested to find out from you, Pathfinders, if you look after a snake, so that you tell us what your experience was like. How was it looking after a snake? Like I said, you look after it in a terrarium. But there are things that you should know. Please don't overfeed your pet. And please do not use your pet to scare other people. Some people are of a nervous disposition and they may never recover from whatever it is that you do to them. Then last but not least, our last requirement asks us if you can tell 2 stories in which a snake played an important part. Now, to hear from you, can you tell me 2 stories in which a snake played an important part? I'm going to count 5 seconds while you find those 2. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm sure by now we picked the most obvious one. In Genesis, we hear about Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve were the first man and woman that ever lived on earth. And in Genesis 3, we hear the sad story about the fall of man, when Eve spoke to a snake, and the snake convinced her that what God had said, that if they eat the fruit from the forbidden fruit, they would not die. Well, Eve listened to the snake, and we all know what happened after that. Man fell from God's grace, and we had to be punished and banished from the Garden of Eden, and the women folk had to have children the hard way. Tough for us. I really wish Eve hadn't listened to that snake. But anyway, the second story that we can talk about in which a reptile played a major part is the story that we find in Exodus 4. God had sent Moses to speak to Pharaoh on behalf of the children of Israel, that he was to let the children of Israel go. But Pharaoh refused to listen. And so God performed a miracle in which Moses' staff, imagine that, a wooden staff thrown on the ground, turned into a snake. Well, the magicians thought they were pretty amazing, so they too threw their staffs down and they turned into snakes too. But listen to this. Moses' staff gobbled all their snakes up. So these are two very interesting stories that are in the Bible that tell us about reptiles. Now, okay, whilst I was talking to you, I revisited my thoughts and my fears about snakes. I will try, I promise to try, to be more friendly towards them. And I will not be so afraid of them. But I'll promise you one thing. If I find a talking snake, I'm going to run as fast as my legs are going to carry me. Now, thank you very much for listening to this presentation. And I hope we learned a thing or two about reptiles. Let's continue to look after God's creatures, even if we don't like them. They may be a bit scary, but let's remember that God made them with a purpose and with a design. And I pray that you will continue to learn more about God's nature. Thank you very much, and God bless.